You're clearing the hallway, right? The judge doesn't like delays. The voice came from a nurse, clipped and dismissive. Nora Valen nodded without lifting her eyes, gripping the mop handle a little tighter as the glass lobby doors hissed open. Outside, a black Jaguar slid to a smooth stop beneath the awning. The driver stepped out first, adjusting his coat before opening the rear door with military precision. Then came Judge Alistair Marin, silver hair slicked back, Rolex flashing under the afternoon sun, dark coat tailored to command. A few hospital staff paused mid-conversation as he passed, lowering their voices. "He's here for his daughter." "Keep it perfect," the nurse whispered again, gesturing toward the pediatric wing. Nora didn't speak. Instead, she slowly pushed her mop bucket to the side, back straight. "I wouldn't have to clean this hallway twice if people stopped tracking mud from privilege," she said quietly, just loud enough to be heard. The nurse blinked, caught between offense and confusion. Before we go further, subscribe if you believe dignity isn't about your paycheck. Because when a single mom janitor helped a girl in the hospital, she didn't know the child's father was the judge who had rewritten her fate, and she was about to rewrite his. Nora bent down, wringing out the mop again. Her back didn't curve the way it used to. Her knees clicked in protest. But her eyes, sharp, calculating, tracked every movement beyond the glass. She looked nothing like who she used to be. And that was by design. Once, she'd given orders from a podium. Now she took them in silence. But today wasn't going to be like every other day. Today, someone important was going to make a mistake. A mistake about her. And this time, she wouldn't correct them. Her name tag said Environmental Services. It didn't mention the Harvard Fellowship or the research papers still cited in immunology journals. It certainly didn't mention the custody hearing. But the man stepping into the hospital now, he remembered it. She hadn't spoken to Judge Marin since the ruling that cost her primary custody of her son 2 years ago. He hadn't looked at her then either. Not really. Not past the uniform. Not past the resignation letter folded in her case file. Not past the public mistake she was still paying for. And now, ironically, they'd both entered the same building through very different doors. She watched as a nurse ushered the judge toward the VIP triage desk. "You'll be in room 3. We've assigned Dr. Voss to your daughter's case. She's the best," the nurse said. Nora tightened her grip on the mop handle. Celine Voss. Of course. Nora hadn't just known Celine. She had once mentored her, back when Dr. Voss was still a wide-eyed intern who triple-checked Nora's diagnosis notes. Now, Celine didn't even glance Nora's way as she breezed down the corridor with a clipboard and a forced smile for the judge. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and roses. The tile beneath Nora's shoes was spotless. She made sure of that. In the hallway mirror near the elevators, Nora caught a glimpse of herself. Gray scrubs, janitor cart. The faintest scar at her temple, faded, but never gone. Her reflection looked like a ghost of someone nobody missed, until now. Because in room 3, something was going to go wrong. And she was the only person in this hospital equipped to handle it. Not because of her title. Not because of access, but because she knew what the rest of them didn't see. Because when it came to rare pediatric cytokine syndromes, she wasn't just qualified. She had once written the emergency protocol, the same one that would be ripped from the archives when this case spiraled out of control. But none of them would know that. Not yet. She pulled her cart into the hallway that led to the pediatric ER. Wheels squeaking softly. Through the frosted windows, she could already see the little girl lying on the bed, pale, eyes open, blinking rapidly. Nurse's hand hovering awkwardly near an oxygen mask. Nora didn't pause. She simply stepped back against the wall, placing herself where no one would notice, until it was too late. "Where are you watching from? Stick around." Judge Marin just walked past the one person who could save his daughter, and he did it without even looking at her. The door to room 3 swung open, then quickly shut behind a blur of white coats. The girl inside hadn't moved since Nora first spotted her. Something about the way her chest rose, shallow, stuttering, triggered alarm bells Nora hadn't heard in years. Dr. Celine Voss stood at the head of the bed, voice low, professional. "Vitals are erratic. Temperatures climbing. Possible acute viral reaction. Page infectious disease." Now Nora stepped back as a junior nurse hurried past, nearly bumping her cart. The nurse didn't apologize. Nobody ever did. Behind the mirrored glass of the observation bay, Judge Marin hovered, arms crossed, face composed but taut. He wasn't shouting. He didn't need to. Power like his had its own gravity, pulling silence and submission wherever it passed. Nora kept wiping down the railing with a cloth she didn't need to use. She wasn't ready to leave this hallway. Not yet. Inside the room, Celine was adjusting oxygen. The monitor let out a chirping sequence, O2 levels dropping. Emily's lips were turning a worrying shade of blue-gray. "Epinephrine," the resident offered hesitantly. "No," Celine snapped. "It's not anaphylaxis." Then her voice lowered again, tight with strain. "She didn't eat anything unusual. There's no rash, no swelling. What are we missing?" Nora knew. She had known from the moment she saw Emily's face. Flushed, yet freezing. Pupils slightly dilated, her little hands clenched into fists. Not from fear, but pain. That combination wasn't random. It was rare. Rare. Enough to silence a whole room of doctors because they didn't want to guess wrong. Nora had only seen it twice in her career. Once in a Ugandan case study she helped translate, and once in a Boston ICU 8 years ago. It was always girls, always sudden, always devastating if caught late. Cytokine release syndrome. They were looking in the wrong direction. She glanced at the clipboard resting in the hallway niche. No labs yet. No cultures. Just notes. Generic words like malaise, fever, hypoxia. She shouldn't speak. She couldn't speak, but she also couldn't walk away. Inside, Celine moved to the door. It opened. She stepped out to meet the resident, who'd returned empty-handed. "They're tied up with a flu outbreak upstairs," he said, avoiding her eyes. "They can't come." Celine inhaled sharply through her nose. "Then we stabilize her and run every panel we have." "Even autoimmune?" Celine hesitated. "Yes, all of it." That was the crack, the moment of uncertainty. And Nora stepped forward. "You'll need a cytokine panel, too," she said, voice calm. Celine turned so fast the hem of her coat flared. Her eyes went hard. "Excuse me?" Nora held her ground, cloth still in hand. "If it's what I think it is, the standard labs won't show you anything until it's too late. Janitorial staff are not authorized to give medical advice," Celine said sharply, voice pitched just high enough for nearby staff to glance over. "I didn't say I was giving advice," Nora replied. "Just a suggestion." From someone who's seen this before? Celine stared. She didn't blink. And for one long second, it looked like she might tear into Nora in front of everyone. But something flickered behind her eyes. Recognition, not of Nora's face, but of her voice, the cadence, the quiet authority that couldn't be faked. Celine's posture shifted slightly. She glanced at the nurse beside her. "Run it, but just do it." The nurse disappeared down the hallway. Celine stepped closer to Nora, lowering her voice. "I don't know who you think you are." Nora didn't let her finish. "You know exactly who I am," she said. "Or you used to." For a beat, Celine said nothing. Then her mouth tightened. She looked over her shoulder, back toward room 3. You shouldn't be here. Neither should a child dying from something preventable. Celine turned and walked back into the room without another word. Nora stood alone again. But this time, the air around her felt different. The residents who passed her now didn't look through her. They looked at her. A nurse slowed as she passed. What? What made you think of cytokine storm? Nora didn't answer. She didn't need to. Not yet. Not until the numbers proved her right. She turned her cart and rolled it back toward the central supply closet. Her steps slow, deliberate. Behind her, the monitor in room 3 began beeping again, this time in a steadier rhythm. The monitor's rhythm had steadied, but the air inside room 3 remained tense. Celine stood near the bed, arms folded, watching Emily's chest rise and fall with measured effort. The oxygen saturation numbers had climbed, still low, but stable enough to stop the spiral for now. Autoimmune panels are in the system, the nurse murmured, entering data. Running cytokine screen next. Celine didn't respond. She stared at the little girl's face, her lips still pale, cheeks blotched with pink heat. She glanced at the hallway, empty now. Nora had disappeared. Outside the door, Judge Marin paced. I want an update, he said, voice low and restrained, but edged with impatience. Now! We're managing her vitals, Celine replied quickly. Still running tests. The early signs point to an inflammatory process. We've expanded the panel to include rare autoimmune responses. Was this triggered by something? He asked, eyes narrowing. A food allergy? A medication error? We're ruling everything out. But she's stable. That's what matters. He didn't look convinced. In fact, he looked like a man who'd spent his life commanding rooms and couldn't understand why this one wasn't obeying. His tie remained perfectly knotted, not a hair out of place, but his knuckles were pale where they gripped the edge of the observation window frame. Meanwhile, 2 floors down, Nora stood in the janitor's closet. The overhead bulb flickered once. She didn't move. Her cart sat behind her, still wet, forgotten. In her hand was a small, crumpled photograph, one she kept tucked behind her ID badge. A younger Nora, coat pristine, standing beside a group of smiling researchers. In the center, a girl just like Emily, alive only because of the paper that Nora had co-authored. It had been buried in a quiet pediatric journal. 200 views. 1 citation in the last 4 years. No one looked for the quiet ones until they needed saving. She slipped the photo back into place. The silence of the closet wrapped around her like old linen. Back upstairs, the cytokine screen came back. The numbers were unmistakable. Celine exhaled slowly. It's cytokine storm. Hyper-inflammatory response. Same cluster markers. The nurse beside her blinked. How did that janitor know? Celine didn't answer. Inside, Judge Marin's phone buzzed. He stepped aside, muttering into it, barely masking the tension in his voice. He kept glancing toward the door, expecting something more, something faster. The nurse spoke again, quieter this time. You want me to notify critical response? Celine hesitated. No, not yet. But Dr. Voss? I said no. Outside, Nora pushed the mop cart slowly back into the hallway. She moved with the practiced rhythm of someone who had learned to be invisible, in plain sight. She stopped beside the door to room 3 and began wiping the baseboards. Head down. Inside, Emily stirred faintly. BP's rising again, the nurse said. Could be stabilizing with supportive care. Celine glanced once more at the glass, and her gaze landed directly on Nora. She stepped outside and closed the door behind her. You need to go, she said quietly. Nora didn't look up. And leave her in your hands? Celine's jaw tightened. This isn't a challenge. It's not. It's a pattern, Nora said. When I spoke up about this in Boston, I was ignored. When I published on it, no one read it. When I warned you back then about premature diagnostics, you said I was being cautious to a fault. Tell me, do you still believe that? Celine didn't respond right away. But something shifted in her face. A crack in the shell. Regret, maybe. Or the memory of the woman she used to admire. She's my patient now, Celine finally said. She's his daughter, Nora replied, and he's the reason my son only sees me twice a month. The silence between them stretched. Then Celine said, You're risking your job. I already lost what mattered. The sound of approaching footsteps broke the tension. Judge Marin rounded the corner. What's going on out here? He demanded. Celine straightened immediately. We've confirmed a rare cytokine storm. She's responding to the intervention. Marin looked between the two women. His gaze paused on Nora. Who is this? He asked, tone clipped. Celine opened her mouth, but Nora stepped forward. I cleaned your courtroom once, she said. But before that, I spent 12 years studying immune dysfunction in pediatric patients. Marin frowned. You're a doctor? I was. Until I wasn't. He looked at Celine, eyebrows raised. She's Dr. Nora Valen, Celine said, the words landing heavier than she intended. I remember that name, Marin muttered. From the custody case. Nora didn't flinch. Yes, you thought I was unstable because I changed careers after my patient died. You told me grief clouded my judgment. The hallway was quiet. Marin glanced through the window to his daughter, then back at Nora. She'll live because I trusted my judgment, Nora said. Not yours. And she turned away, mop bucket squeaking softly as she walked back down the hallway. Celine remained frozen outside room 3. The judge beside her still watching Nora retreat down the hallway, the sound of her mop bucket echoing long after she turned the corner. Judge Marin finally broke the silence. Why is she here? If she's a doctor, why is she pushing a mop? Celine's eyes stayed fixed on the far hallway. Because no one asked what she lost. Marin's jaw tightened. His fingers twitched, but he said nothing more. Inside the room, Emily's monitor gave a steady, rhythmic beep, a fragile metronome of survival. Celine turned and stepped back inside, issuing a quiet flurry of instructions. We'll need dexamethasone, low dose, and order a cardiac panel just to be safe. Cytokine storms can throw the rhythm off. The nurse nodded and moved quickly. Marin hesitated at the doorway, then stepped in, his expression softer now. He knelt beside his daughter's bed, brushing a lock of hair from her damp forehead. She said, This would have been missed? Celine didn't sugarcoat it. By everyone in this hospital, yes, including me outside, in the supply corridor. Nora stood still with her hands braced on the metal cart. Her knuckles were white. This wasn't over. She'd said too much, shown too much. The hospital didn't care about near miracles when they came from people not wearing a white coat. Protocols didn't make exceptions for anythings. She pulled her badge from her pocket and stared at it. Environmental services. No photo, just a barcode and her name. Once, her name had meant something in rooms filled with brilliance. Now it was scanned beside garbage bins. She tucked the badge away and resumed her rounds. If there was a fallout coming, she'd let it come. By the time she returned to the East Wing, word had already spread. 2 nurses stood near the break room, speaking in lowered voices. They fell silent as Nora passed. She caught a sliver of the whisper anyway. Wasn't she? I think she used to be. Nora didn't break stride. She turned the cart into an empty waiting room and sat down on the edge of a worn vinyl chair, her eyes scanning the polished floor, the humming lights overhead. Her fingers found the folded photo in her pocket again, brushing the creased edge like a rosary. 12 years of medicine. One mistake, and everything she'd built unraveled. Not a malpractice error, not a fatal misjudgment, just one child lost to a condition she couldn't stop, and a media storm that branded her a cautionary tale. That was all it took. The hospital had quietly closed ranks. Her supervisor suggested a step back for recovery. The board labeled her emotionally compromised, and Judge Marin, sitting high above it all, had used that language to decide she wasn't currently suited for sole custody, all because grief made her human. That was the part no one forgave. Footsteps pulled her from thought. A young voice broke the quiet. "Are you the cleaning doctor?" Nora looked up. A boy, 8, maybe 9, stood near the doorway. Messy hair, one untied shoe, a visitor wristband on his arm. He clutched a stuffed bear in one hand. "I don't know," she said softly. "What's a cleaning doctor?" He stepped closer. "One of the nurses said you saved the judge's kid. They said you used to be a big doctor, but now you clean things." Nora gave a quiet smile. "Something like that. My mom says that's impossible. That doctors don't become cleaners." Nora tilted her head. "Maybe your mom's never lost something big enough to make her stop being what she was." He frowned, trying to process that. Then he held out the bear. "This is Maya. She gets scared too. You can borrow her if you want." Nora blinked. Something in her chest shifted. She reached out and gently touched the bear's tiny paw. "Thanks, but I think Maya needs you more than I do." The boy nodded like that was fair, then turned and ran back down the hallway, Bear bouncing behind him. Nora sat in the quiet for a few more minutes. Then she stood up, straightened her cart, and returned to the hallway. As she rounded the corner back toward pediatrics, she nearly collided with the nurse from earlier, the one who'd overheard her suggest the cytokine panel. Miss Valen," the nurse stammered. "Could I ask, what led you to suspect a storm response? I've never seen one triggered without chemo or CAR-T therapy." Nora regarded her for a moment. The child's face, the way her eyes stopped tracking, shallow breathing paired with heat instead of chills. That combination should always raise questions. But more than that, intuition? The nurse looked stunned. "They don't teach that." "They don't," Nora said. "But they should." She moved past the nurse, no longer unnoticed, not quite reinstated, but no longer invisible. Judge Marin stood by the vending machines, staring blankly at a can of ginger ale, slowly clunking down the chute. His suit jacket hung over one arm. The sleeves of his white dress shirt rolled up in uneven cuffs. For once, the perfectly polished image had slipped. Emily was resting. Stable, they said. But stable didn't mean safe. He hadn't thanked the woman who stopped it from getting worse. Not really. He hadn't known how. His phone buzzed. He silenced it without looking. Across the hallway, Selene exited the staff room and walked over. She paused a moment before speaking. She was right. About all of it, Marin didn't turn. "Who is she now?" "She's the janitor." "No, who was she?" Selene hesitated. "Dr. Nora Valen, pediatric immunology. She trained half the specialists under 40, and then she disappeared. After the Jacobs girl died. You might remember that one." "I do," Marin said quietly. "She left the field after that. The tabloids shredded her. The hospital distanced themselves. People like Nora, when they fall, no one sticks around. I ruled on her custody case." "I know." They stood in silence, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. Marin finally picked up the can and walked back toward the ICU hallway. Inside room 3, Emily slept with her head turned gently to the side, a blanket tucked beneath her chin. Her heart monitor blinked steady green. Marin sat down beside her bed and rested his hand over hers. He didn't hear Nora approaching until her footsteps stopped just outside the door. She didn't enter, just waited. He looked up and saw her standing there. Gray uniform, hair tied, back, eyes steady. "You were right," he said, his voice quiet. Nora didn't move. Too late for that. He didn't argue. "I read the file again," he said after a pause. "Everything I overlooked, everything I let bias decide." Nora's brow twitched faintly, but she said nothing. "I thought I was protecting your son," he continued, "from instability, from someone emotionally compromised. You thought grief was weakness. I thought grief was dangerous," Marin corrected. "And that was my mistake." Nora's eyes dropped for the first time. When she looked up again, there was no warmth in her expression, but no cruelty either. "I wasn't dangerous," she said. "I was broken, in trying to rebuild, but your ruling made sure I stayed broken a little longer." Marin nodded slowly. "I see that now." A long silence passed between them. Then he asked, "Why didn't you say something sooner? Reveal who you were?" Nora shook her head. "And what? Watch them pretend to listen? Let them think I was showing off? You don't shout credentials when no one's asked for your voice in the first place." He exhaled, rubbing his temples. "I didn't even recognize you." "Not until Celine said your name." "That's because you never really saw me," she said. "Not in the courtroom. Not here." He didn't argue. Inside, Emily stirred slightly in her sleep. Marin rose to check on her, his movements slower, heavier. Nora watched him gently adjust the blanket, his fingers trembling. She turned to leave, but then he spoke again. "You saved my daughter?" She paused at the edge of the hall. "I didn't do it for you," she said without turning. "I know." Nora walked away. Down the hall, Celine leaned over the nurse's station, reviewing Emily's chart. The senior resident beside her tapped nervously at the desk. "You sure you want to write this into the report?" he asked. Celine didn't look up. "Yes, but if the board sees this..." She was right. She deserves credit. She's not licensed anymore. She didn't need a license to save that girl's life. The resident hesitated, then nodded and walked off. Celine sat for a moment longer, then began typing. "Cytokine storm identified by initial non-staff observation. Former physician with prior expertise. Intervention based on unorthodox early recognition pattern led to stabilization." She saved the note. She wouldn't erase the truth just because it was inconvenient. Back in the staff corridor, Nora changed out of her uniform. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her cardigan. The badge clipped to her scrubs still read, "Nora Valen, Environmental Services." She unclipped it and stared at it a long moment. Then she slipped it into the locker. On the inside of the door, taped in the corner, was a crumpled court visitation schedule. Mondays, every other weekend. Holidays rotated. Her sons. Handwriting on the edge. "Mom, I'm keeping count." She closed the locker slowly. Outside, footsteps approached. It was Celine. She held out a folded piece of paper. "From administration. You're not being penalized," she said. "Technically, you didn't break protocol." Nora raised an eyebrow. "Technically. I might have edited a few details." Nora took the paper and opened it. Just a formal incident acknowledgement. No reprimand. Celine added, "There's something else. The board is opening a new pediatric outreach project. They're looking for someone who understands field conditions, someone who can train others. Quietly. No press. Just impact." Nora folded the paper. "I'll think about it," she said. Celine smiled faintly. "That's all I wanted." The hallway was quieter than it had been all day. The crisis had passed, but its echoes still lingered. Voices were softer now. Glances held longer. Even the floor, gleaming under Nora's careful attention, seemed to carry a kind of hush. She returned the folded paper from administration to her locker, pressing it flat beneath a photo of her son taped inside the door. His grin, all front teeth and mischief, stared back at her. Every decision she made pointed back to him. She'd walked away from medicine not because she lacked the will to stay, but because staying had meant risking her mind breaking in a place that wouldn't let her feel. And that would have taken her even further from him. Losing patience was hard. Losing purpose was harder. But losing her son, that had almost finished her. And now the same judge who'd said she was too unstable to raise a child had stood in front of her while she saved his. Funny how justice came back around. It didn't always wear a robe. She slung her utility bag over one shoulder and walked out of the locker room, blending again into the moving current of hospital life. But something was different now. Not in the way people moved around her, but in how they didn't. No one looked through her anymore. They looked at her, small acknowledgments at first. A nod from the respiratory tech. A glance from the anesthesiologist who once pushed past her like she was furniture. Even the cafeteria clerk gave her a free tea with a small wink. "You're the one who helped that girl, right?" he whispered. Nora didn't confirm it. She just wrapped her hands around the paper cup and walked on. At the pediatric wing, Selene stood at the doorway of room 3, speaking quietly to Marin. They both turned as Nora approached. "She's asking for you," Selene said. Nora blinked. "Me?" "She doesn't remember much from earlier, but she remembers your face." Marin stepped back to let her pass. "Please." It wasn't a command, not even a request. It was permission. And maybe something like gratitude. Nora stepped into the room. Emily sat up slightly now, propped by pillows. Her cheeks had color. Her eyes tracked slowly across the room. "You're the hallway lady," Emily whispered. Nora smiled. "Guilty. You brought me water?" "I did." Emily looked down at her hands. Everyone else looked scared, but not you. Nora sat in the chair beside the bed. "That's because I've seen things like this before." I knew what it was. "You're not just the cleaning lady, are you?" Nora paused, then shook her head. "Not just." Emily nodded like that made sense. Her voice softened. "You remind me of my teacher. She left school after her daughter got sick, but I think she was still a teacher." Even if she didn't teach anymore, Nora blinked. The truth of it hit deeper than she expected. "I think once you love something enough," Emily said, "it just stays in you." Nora reached over and gently squeezed the girl's hand. "That's exactly right." She stayed for a few more minutes, answering quiet questions about the machines and the wires. Then she stood, adjusted the blanket one last time, and turned toward the door. Outside, Marin waited. "She's safe now," Nora said. Marin gave a quiet nod. "Because of you," Selene added. "Because she knew what no one else did." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was reverent. Then Marin said something that caught Nora off guard. "I'm filing to reopen your custody case." Her breath caught. He continued. "What I ruled then was based on incomplete understanding. On fear, if I'm honest. That's not justice, and you deserve better." Nora studied him carefully. His voice held no performance, no ego, just weight. "You can't undo what happened," she said. "No," he agreed, "but I can stop it from continuing." She looked at Selene, who said nothing, only nodded once. And Nora realized, for the first time in a long time, she wasn't standing alone. Later that evening, Nora sat on a bench near the employee exit, watching the last stretch of daylight fade behind the parking structure. In her hand, she held her old ID badge, the faded one from her last hospital. It had been buried deep in a box she hadn't opened in 2 years. She ran her thumb over the photo. The woman in the picture looked tired even then, but not erased. A quiet voice interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Valen?" It was the nurse from earlier, the one who ran the cytokine screen. "I just wanted to say, thank you," she said. "You didn't have to speak up." "But you did," Nora smiled faintly. "There wasn't a choice." "Not really." The nurse hesitated. "You taught today more than any class I've taken this year. If you ever, I mean, if you ever teach again, please tell me." Nora looked back at her badge, and for the first time in years, she considered the possibility of putting it back on. Maybe not today, maybe not here. The wind outside the hospital picked up as the sun slipped beneath the skyline. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, humming their usual lullaby of exhaustion. Nora stood in the rear parking lot, beneath a halo of light, watching an ambulance pull out with quiet sirens. The city moved on. It always did. But something in her had shifted. Earlier that day, she'd been a name on a checklist, barely more than a smudge in the background. Now, eyes followed her in hallways. Quiet conversations fell silent when she entered, not from hostility, from uncertainty, from reconsideration. The kind of silence that meant people were rewriting her name in their minds. She stepped off the curb and crossed the lot toward the older side of the hospital. The wing that had long been converted into storage and overflow offices. Her badge still gave her access. That hadn't changed. The door clicked open with a faint beep. The hallway smelled of dust and paper. Room 317. She hesitated at the door before pushing it open. It was exactly as she remembered it. Once a pediatric research suite, now reduced to archive space. File boxes lined the walls. An old exam table was pushed to the corner beneath a yellowing window. In the far cabinet, behind a row of outdated CPR mannequins, Nora found what she was looking for: a slim black binder with her initials in faded ink on the spine. Valen, Immunoresponse Emergency Trials, her name, her work. She opened the binder slowly. The pages were still crisp. Her handwriting covered most of them. Notes in the margins, dosage adjustments, predictive markers for storm syndromes. The same work that had saved Emily Marin's life. No one else had thought to pull it from the archives. Nora closed the binder and hugged it to her chest. Behind her, the door creaked. She turned. Judge Marin stood in the doorway, coat folded over one arm. This time, no entourage, no clipboard shadows, just him. "I had a feeling you'd be here," he said quietly. She didn't move. "Looking for something? I was told this wing is closed." "It is," she replied. That never stopped anyone with unfinished business. He stepped inside, eyes roaming the room. "So this is where it started." "No," she said. "This is where it stalled." He nodded. "You built something remarkable here." "And watched it be forgotten." Marin walked slowly toward the exam table, running his hand along the vinyl surface. "What happened to the girl? The one you couldn't save?" Nora didn't answer right away. Her fingers tightened on the binder. "She came in during a holiday weekend," she said finally. "Fever, hallucinations. Her parents thought it was the flu. The on-call staff didn't escalate until her liver function collapsed. I was the one who caught the inflammatory markers. But I was too late." Marin listened, head bowed slightly. "They ruled it unavoidable. But I knew different. I knew I'd missed the signs. And so did the media and the hospital. They didn't fire me, but they made it clear I was no longer trusted. So I stepped away." He turned toward her. "And that's what I read in your custody file. You read fear in it. Not failure, but fear wins in courtrooms." Marin said nothing. He took a breath, like he was weighing something heavier than robes or rulings. I can't erase that decision, he said. I don't want you to. He looked up, surprised. I want you to remember it, Nora continued. Every time you see a woman who speaks from pain instead of polish, every time you judge a parent through the lens of perfection. His throat bobbed with a quiet swallow. I will. She stepped forward and handed him the binder. He hesitated. I can't take this. It's not for you. It's for her, Nora said. When she's older, if she ever asks how she survived, give her this. He accepted the binder, both hands holding it like something sacred. And then, softly, he said, Do you think your son will forgive me? She held his gaze. You don't need his forgiveness. Then whose? She didn't answer. She stepped past him and walked out into the hallway. And for the first time, Judge Alistair Marin stood alone in a room filled with all the things his power had never taught him to see. Outside, the sky had turned a deep shade of violet. Nora stood beneath the street lamp, the breeze brushing against her arms. In her back pocket was a printed email. Celine had sent it an hour earlier. If you're willing to consult, even unofficially, I can build a case for reinstatement. It won't be easy, but it would be real. Think about it. Beneath it, in handwriting, Celine had scrawled, P.S. Your old white coat is still in storage. Tag says Valen. Still pressed. Nora folded the paper again and looked toward the parking lot. A familiar car pulled in slowly. The door opened. Her son stepped out, holding his weekend bag, eyes searching. She walked toward him, heart full, hands empty. Hey, Mom, he said. Hey, baby, she replied, pulling him close. This time, she didn't have to let go so soon. Nora's son, Milo, clung to her side as they walked through the parking structure. He was taller than last time, a little leaner in the face. Time had moved without her permission, but here he was, hand in hers, warm and real. How was school? She asked. He shrugged. Okay. We did a science project. Yeah? He nodded. We had to build a model lung. I used a balloon and a straw like you showed me before. My teacher said I should think about medical school. Nora smiled. You've got time to decide. But it's weird, he added. Everyone kept asking me where I got the idea. I didn't say anything, just said I learned it at home. Something in her chest tugged loose. That's good enough. They reached the car and tossed his bag into the back. As she started the engine, Milo looked out the window at the hospital behind them. Are you still working here? Yes. But you helped save that girl, right? Nora hesitated. I helped. Then why aren't you a doctor again? The question landed gently, but it still landed. Because that takes more than just one moment, she said. It takes paperwork. Boards. People who believe you can be trusted again. Milo looked at her, serious now. I trust you. She reached over and touched his cheek. That means more than anything else. By Monday morning, Nora stood outside Celine's office, holding a file folder under one arm. She wore her uniform, same as always. But the posture had changed. No longer folded inward. She carried herself like someone who didn't need a nameplate to walk through a door. Celine waved her in without looking up from her monitor. You read the email? I did. And? I'm willing to consult, Nora said, but I'm not here for a title. Celine finally met her eyes. What are you here for then? Correction. Celine nodded slowly. Then we start small. She passed over a packet of documents, internal workshop outlines, clinical mentorship modules, a quiet back-channel return. No press release, no white coat yet. Just trust on probation. It was enough. As Nora skimmed the forms, Celine added, I pulled your original credential file from the archives. You're still board eligible. If we pass the appeal board, Reinstatement's possible. I'm not rushing. I know. But I'm not hiding either. Celine smiled faintly. Good. Later that afternoon, Nora pushed her cart down the fourth-floor corridor out of habit. She passed the oncology wing and paused near the family lounge. Two residents sat at the long table, poring over textbooks. One of them glanced up as Nora passed. Dr. Valen? She froze. The name landed awkwardly. I'm sorry. Miss Valen, someone said you might be involved in the mentorship track. Nora raised an eyebrow. You study immuno? Trying to, he said. But I'm stuck on this cytokine regulation chart. It's all theory, and none of it matches what we saw last week. Nora stepped closer. Her hand brushed the edge of the textbook. It's not theory, she said. It's just incomplete. He moved over instinctively, offering her space. She pulled a pen from her scrubs and circled a section of the diagram. Here's your mistake, she said. You're assuming it always follows a binary path. Trigger and resolve. But cytokine storms aren't binary. They're recursive loops. The body fights itself harder when it's losing. The student blinked. I've never heard it explained that way. Nora offered a tight smile. You wouldn't. They stopped printing my article 2 years ago. He laughed nervously, then caught himself. Would you be willing to explain the loop mechanics sometime? She glanced toward the hallway, then back at the page. I will, she said, but only if you promise not to quote me unless you understand what I'm saying. The student nodded, eyes wide. She handed back the pen. Write your name on this. I'll send you a better source. As she turned to leave, the student looked at his colleague, then whispered, She's the one who saved that girl. The judge's daughter Nora didn't correct them. Let the rumor spread. Sometimes, the world rebuilt your reputation without your permission. That evening, she sat at her kitchen table with Milo, reviewing a pamphlet from the district court. The new hearing date was printed in red at the top. Custody modification, petitioned by Judge Alistair Marin himself. Milo looked over the edge of the paper. Does this mean I can live here full-time? It means we're asking, Nora said. And it means someone's listening this time. He nodded slowly. I hope they say yes. Me too. She leaned over and kissed his temple. But either way, I'm not going anywhere. Milo folded the paper and tucked it into his school folder like it was a math assignment. Then he paused and looked at her. Mom? Yeah? Does it feel weird? Being back in the hospital, but kind of different now? Nora thought about that. About walking halls where her name had once been erased and now was being slowly remembered. It feels like I finally stopped apologizing, she said. Milo grinned. Good. 'Cause you didn't do anything wrong. And in that moment, she believed him. The next morning, Nora stood in front of the full-length mirror, tucked behind her bedroom door. It was the same mirror she used before every shift. But today, she didn't wear her gray janitor scrubs. Today, she wore navy. Celine had called it a consultant uniform, a simple fitted jacket with a name tag that didn't list a title, only Nora Valen, pediatric liaison. It wasn't reinstatement. Not yet. But it wasn't erasure either. She took a breath, smoothed the front of the jacket, and tied her hair back the way she used to when she scrubbed in, tight at the base of her neck, no strands loose, as if control could be built from the outside in. Milo stood in the doorway, backpack slung over one shoulder, holding a half-eaten granola bar. You look like yourself again. Nora turned. What does that mean? I don't know. Just not like you're pretending to be smaller. That hit harder than she expected. She stepped forward and hugged him. I'll see you after school. He nodded. Don't let anyone talk down to you today. I won't. And if they do? She smiled. I'll talk back. At the hospital, her arrival was quiet. There was no announcement, no ceremony, just a laminated badge clipped beside her old environmental services tag. She kept both visible. Let people decide which one they wanted to acknowledge. The morning briefing had already begun when she stepped into the conference room. Celine glanced up, then gestured her forward. Some heads turned, some didn't. Dr. Voss spoke plainly. Today's orientation is for pediatric intake support. Ms. Valen will be joining us in a consultative capacity to assist with immune risk stratification. One resident raised a hand. Wait, that Nora Valen? Someone elbowed him, but it was too late. Nora didn't flinch. If you mean the one who cleaned this hallway last week, yes. If you mean the one who published on subclinical cytokine escalation, also yes. The room fell into an uneasy quiet. Celine jumped in. She'll be reviewing some of our emergency protocols this week and co-facilitating case reviews. I expect everyone to treat her expertise with respect. That includes residents, nurses, and yes, even you, Dr. Brenner. The man who had raised his hand gave a sheepish nod. Nora took a seat at the edge of the room. She didn't need the center of attention. She never had. Her impact was sharper when unexpected. As the meeting wrapped, one of the residents, a woman with dark curls and nervous hands, approached. "I read your paper," she said softly. "Not the one about storm syndrome. The one about familial markers in undiagnosed cases." Nora looked up, surprised. "That's an old paper." "It's still right." Nora offered a quiet smile. "Then maybe it's not old." Just waiting, by mid-afternoon, she stood in the pediatric triage ward, clipboard in hand, shadowing a young nurse through a series of new cases. A 6-year-old with joint pain, a toddler with persistent fever, a teen with unexplained swelling. For each, Nora asked questions, not to lead the team, but to guide their thinking. What's missing from the picture? What haven't you ruled out? What would you want to find if you were wrong? The staff began to shift. Not all at once, but slowly. Not everyone liked being questioned by someone who didn't have a doctor in front of her name. But the smart ones listened. The ones who'd seen Emily Marin's monitors flatline before Nora stepped in. They leaned in now, and that was enough. Downstairs, Judge Marin sat across from his attorney in a quiet conference room. His tie was off, jacket folded beside him. The file on the table was thick. Custody motions, visitation logs, old transcripts. The lawyer turned to a page marked in blue. "This is your signed opinion from the original ruling," she said. "We'll need to formally acknowledge reversal. That means admitting judicial error, I'm aware." She hesitated. "It may reflect on your record." "I don't care," he said flatly. The lawyer closed the file. "Then let's make it right." That evening, Nora waited in a side office near the boardroom as Celine debriefed hospital leadership. She could hear muffled voices through the wall, phrases like "asset to the team" and "earned reconsideration." Nora didn't pace. She didn't fidget. Instead, she sat in front of an old dry erase board with a marker in hand and began sketching diagrams, immune patterns, chain reactions. Every forgotten term that once flowed through her, like breath, now poured back through her fingertips. The door opened. Celine entered. "They want to see you next week." Credential review, Nora capped the marker. "So it's happening." "It's happening." Celine hesitated. "You'll need a mentor for the re-entry paperwork. Someone with standing who can vouch for you." Nora arched a brow. "And you're offering?" "No," Celine said, surprising her. "You already have one." She handed Nora a folded sheet of paper. At the bottom was a signature. Judge Alistair Marin, Esquire. Character endorsement for professional reinstatement. Nora stared at it for a long moment. "Why?" Celine smiled. Because he finally saw you. And once people see you, they don't forget. Nora folded the letter slowly, not as proof, but as permission. The following week, Nora stood in front of the credentialing board's long mahogany table, hands clasped behind her back, chin lifted. The overhead lights were bright, clinical. A panel of 5 reviewed her file, page by page, some skimming, others underlining. They said little. She had expected questions about gaps, about her withdrawal from practice, about the media's portrayal of the Jacobs case. But none of them asked about any of that. Instead, a woman near the end of the table finally looked up. "Why now?" Nora's response came without pause. "Because I finally stopped apologizing for surviving." The panelist set down her pen. Another leaned forward, fingers steepled. "And if we reinstate you, what role do you see yourself returning to?" "I don't want my old job back," Nora said. "I want the one that should have existed in the first place. The one that catches the children no one else knows how to read. The one's too quiet, too complex, too inconvenient to diagnose on schedule." She let the silence sit for a moment. Not a title, a purpose. A beat past. Then the woman who had asked the question smiled. Not big, but enough. The meeting was adjourned with a promise of notification within 5 business days. But Nora already knew the answer. 3 days later, she stood in the pediatric conference room in a white coat that bore her name again. Not the old one, a new one. Fresh, uncreased. No dust of past failures clinging to the sleeves. Dr. Nora Valen beneath it, her badge now read, Pediatric Immunology, Advisory and Training Lead. Celine pinned it herself, just before the first in-hospital case review began. "This room will eat you alive if you hesitate," Celine said with a faint smirk. Nora returned it with one of her own. "Good. I'm hungry." They stepped into the room together. A dozen staff filled the seats. Residents, interns, nurses, and 2 attending physicians who had remained skeptical since the reinstatement. News began circulating, but skepticism didn't rattle Nora anymore. She had already been buried once. There was no further down to go. She clicked on the projector. A case file appeared. Unexplained pediatric immune flare in a 10-year-old. Fever, low-grade psychosis, elevated inflammatory markers. The attending had labeled it atypical infection. Nora spoke with calm precision. "Tell me what's missing." Silence. Then a young nurse offered. "Neuroconsult wasn't completed?" Nora nodded. "Correct. But that's not the gap." The room leaned in. She circled a date on the projected chart. This is the moment the team went passive. No new labs, no escalation. Why? An intern shifted uncomfortably. "We thought she was stabilizing." "She wasn't," Nora replied. "She was plateauing. Storm syndrome doesn't erupt. It simmers. And it fools the confident she let the lesson hang. No anger, no superiority, just clarity. People began to write faster. When the session ended, one of the skeptical attendings lingered behind. "You still memorize these cases?" Nora offered a quiet smile. "I never stopped." Later that week, Judge Marin returned to the hospital. Not in a rush, not flanked by aides. Just a man bringing his daughter for a follow-up appointment. Emily skipped beside him, ponytail bouncing, now full of color and energy again. Nora met them outside the pediatrics wing. She wore her coat, but no airs. Just the clipboard in her hand and the gentle confidence that had always been hers, even when it was hidden under bleach-stained scrubs. "She's doing well?" she asked. "She is," Marin replied. "Your protocols become standard procedure here now. Celine told me she's the one who pushed it through." He smiled faintly. "But you're the one who pushed her." Emily stepped forward shyly. "I drew you something." Nora knelt down. The girl handed her a folded piece of printer paper. On it, in colored marker, was a drawing of a hospital room with a tiny girl in bed and a woman in a blue coat standing beside her. Above them was a heart. "It's you," Emily said. "The cleaning doctor who made me not die." Nora blinked fast but smiled. "That's the best title I've ever had." Emily threw her arms around her. Nora hugged her tight. When the girls skipped off to the exam room, Marin lingered a moment longer. "I told the board everything," he said. "Not just your qualifications. Your restraint, your dignity, the way you let me arrive at the truth without humiliating me. That wasn't kindness," Nora said. "It was strategy." He chuckled. "Then may you continue to out-strategize us all." She offered a single nod. "We'll see." That evening, she and Milo sat on their small apartment balcony, eating takeout by the city lights. He handed her the court letter without speaking. She unfolded it. Full custodial restoration. Granted. She read it 3 times. Then Milo leaned his head against her arm. "So, we're home?" Nora looked out at the city she'd once walked invisibly through. "Yeah," she whispered. "We're home." 2 months later, Nora stood at the back of the hospital auditorium, watching from the shadows as Celine took the stage. A laminated banner above the podium read, "Hospital Grand Rounds, Innovations in Pediatric Crisis Response." The crowd was larger than expected. Not just staff, outside professionals, students, a few journalists. Cameras rolled discreetly from the corner. The hospital was rebuilding its image, and they had chosen the right story to showcase. But Nora hadn't agreed to speak. She hadn't wanted the spotlight. Not then. Still, her name was on the program. 3rd page. Quiet font. Advisory lead, Dr. Nora Valen, co-developer of Emergency Immunoprotocol version 2. Celine's voice cut through the room. "We're here today because a child survived what she shouldn't have. And not because the system worked, but because someone stepped in when the system hesitated. Because someone remembered the patient before the protocol, a ripple moved through the audience." Celine continued. "We talk about innovation like it's invention, but sometimes it's restoration. Recalling what we once knew before fear replaced instinct." The lights dimmed as a slide presentation began. Case data, charts, diagrams. Nora's original immune loop sketches. Now digitized, sharpened, branded with the hospital logo. She felt something deep in her chest pull taut. Validation could be public, but dignity? That was personal. She stepped out into the hallway, letting the presentation continue without her. Her name could remain in the room. Her body didn't need to. In the corridor, she passed by a janitor wheeling a cart, the same model she used for over a year. He paused and recognized her. "Dr. Valen," he said with quiet surprise. "Didn't expect to see you out here. Didn't expect to feel more at home in the hallway than in the spotlight," she replied. He chuckled. "Same cart, you know. Still squeaks near radiology. Some things never change." They stood in silence a moment. Then he added, "I watched what you did, what they did, what they didn't. You made it through?" Nora nodded. "So did you." He gave a small salute with 2 fingers, then kept moving. Later that day, back in her office, a small windowless room tucked between diagnostics and records, Nora opened a fresh manila folder marked New Initiative Proposal. Inside were the blueprints for something bigger, a hospital-linked early detection outreach program, embedded nurse visits in underfunded schools, remote triage support for parents navigating rare pediatric symptoms. She wasn't just returning to medicine, she was reshaping it. She made a note in the margin of the draft. "Prioritize mothers. They speak first. The system listens last." Just then, her phone buzzed. A text from Celine. He's downstairs. Nora didn't have to ask who. She walked to the elevator slowly, hands still stained faintly with red ink from her edits. Downstairs, in the hospital's small family lounge, Judge Marin stood beside a coffee machine, looking like a man who'd taken off his armor and didn't quite know where to place it. He turned as she entered. "I wasn't sure if you'd come. I wasn't sure if you'd stay." He gestured to the seat beside him. "I won't take much of your time." She sat, crossed her legs, waited. "There's a program I'm starting," he said. "Legal infrastructure for medical reinstatement. Doctors who left after trauma or false claims. It's not official yet, but I'm pushing it through the judiciary." Quietly, Nora didn't interrupt. "And I want your name on the advisory panel." She let the weight of the offer settle. "It won't be easy," he added. "There will be pushback. Old names, old grudges. I've lived in worse company." He studied her for a moment. "You're not the same woman I saw in court." "I was never the woman you saw in court," she replied. He nodded slowly, accepting the correction. "Will you do it?" he asked. "I'll think about it." Marin stood, smoothed the front of his coat, and reached into his breast pocket. He handed her a folded note. "This is from Emily," he said. "She insisted." Nora opened the paper. Crayon scribbles formed the words. "Thank you for seeing me before I was invisible." Nora's throat tightened. She folded the note carefully, like something sacred, and placed it in her coat pocket. Marin paused at the door. "Some debts don't need to be repaid. But this one, I'll carry." Nora didn't reply. She just watched him go. That night, she returned home to find Milo fast asleep on the couch, a textbook on his chest, his school shoes still on. She knelt beside him, gently pulled the book away, and tugged off his sneakers. Tucked inside the book was a handwritten essay draft. "The person I admire most." Beneath it, his first sentence read, "My mom used to clean hospitals. Now she runs one." Nora didn't cry. She didn't need to. The healing had already begun. The hearing room wasn't packed. No gavel, no press, just a folding table, a judge in a gray cardigan, not a robe, in a small circle of people trying to correct something long overdue. Nora sat across from her son, Milo, her hand resting calmly on the edge of the table. To her left, her attorney. To her right, a social worker with a yellow legal pad. Across from her sat Judge Alistair Marin, not presiding, testifying. He read from a prepared statement, though his voice barely needed the paper. "In 2021, I ruled to limit Ms. Nora Vallen's custody rights on the grounds that her career departure signaled emotional instability. I now recognize that I misunderstood the nature of trauma, professional burnout, and grief. I failed to ask what she had endured. I only measured what she had lost." He looked up then, directly at Nora. "My prior judgment was flawed, and I fully support the petition for full custody restoration, with no restrictions." The room was still. The judge behind the desk, a woman in her early 60s, folded her hands. "Thank you, Mr. Marin. The court finds in favor of the petitioner. Custody will be fully restored, effective immediately." Nora didn't react at first. No tears, no gasp, just the slow, quiet rise of breath that had been held in for 2 years too long. Milo grabbed her hand. "We won?" "We did." Outside the courthouse, spring light spilled over the stone steps. Nora and Milo stood at the bottom, the paper in her hand still warm from the clerk's printer. People passed by, unaware that anything had happened. No news crews, no headlines, just a mother and son reclaiming something no one had the right to take. Milo looked up. "So, are you going to tell your team?" "Eventually." "You're not going to tell them today?" Nora smiled. "They'll feel it. I'll walk different. That's enough." At the hospital, A new flyer was posted near the staff break room. Pediatric Critical Response Simulation, led by Dr. Nora Valen. Below that, topic: when the system hesitates, you must not. Nora arrived 15 minutes early. The room filled faster than usual. Celine sat at the back, arms crossed, smiling faintly like a proud older sister who'd never say the words out loud. As Nora clicked through the slides, case studies, interventions, mistakes turned into lessons. She noticed a small group in the corner, cleaning staff, still in uniform, standing, not seated, watching. She paused mid-slide. Then, without comment, she grabbed 3 spare chairs and carried them across the room. "Sit," she said gently. "This isn't just for doctors." The room fell quiet for a beat. Then one of the senior nurses followed her lead, pulling over 2 more chairs. Soon, the circle expanded. Voices joined, boundaries blurred. It was no longer a seminar. It was a restoration. That evening, Milo sat cross-legged on the living room floor, building something with plastic gears and a battery kit. Nora lay on the couch, a thick binder on her lap. Curriculum drafts, community training modules. She was planning a pilot program for at-risk districts, teaching basic immune emergency literacy to school nurses. "Can I help?" Milo asked. "You want to read cytokine markers?" He shrugged. "I want to know what made you so smart." She laughed. "Surviving made me smart." "Then I want to learn to survive like you." She closed the binder. "No," she said gently. "You'll learn to live. I already did the surviving for us." He nodded, satisfied with that. As he returned to his gears, she opened the drawer in the side table. Inside was a velvet box. The hospital had given it to her the week before. A silver medallion engraved with the words, "For exceptional contribution to pediatric innovation." She hadn't worn it, probably never would, but she kept it. Not for recognition, for remembrance. Because it was never about titles, or coats, or podiums. It was about staying when you had every reason to leave, speaking up when silence was safer, and seeing others before they disappeared entirely. If this story moved you, tell us. What part hit hardest, and where are you watching from? And don't miss our next story. A single mom janitor took in a homeless boy, not knowing he was the billionaire CEO's son. Trust me, you'll feel it. Subscribe to never miss the moment the underdog stops apologizing and starts writing their own ending. And tell us in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?